Hello and welcome to The Urban. I'm Marjorie Payon. Coming up, nearly 70% of humanity will live in cities by 2050. This future is just tomorrow, but will more inclusive, fluid, and greener cities happen overnight? Local governments and tech giants are facing a users and citizen backlash as we become more aware of the power of data-driven areas. And even differences between urban, suburban, and rural areas are slightly fading, blurring the lines of the 21st century societies. In this episode, we're about to tackle what metropolitanization really means. Will megacities become the new black? Can they be a weapon of mass awareness to fight against climate change? And what have we learned from grassroots movement questioning power and society over the past few months? To do so, we have great guests in studio. Mika Brunel, CEO of Gecina, and Jean Jouzel, climatologist, former vice chair of the scientific working group of the IPCC, co-recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Stay put, since we're about to dive into these questions in a few minutes. But first is one of the leading voices on technology in urban space, even though challenging the idea that pure technology is a game changer here. He's an architect, an engineer, leading the MIT's Sensible City Lab, always on the move from Boston to Turin or Shenzhen. Let's see with Carlo Ratti how smart city have turned into apps and networks of smart citizen. Good morning to you, Carlo. Great to have you on The Urban.
Good morning, everybody.
So, smart city as a concept is way too simplistic from your perspective. How should we define it in 2019?
Well, we don't like the word smart city very much. And the reason is that, to me, it sounds a bit too much like a city that's run by technology. And that's why our lab at MIT is called Sensible City Lab. We like the idea of a city that's able to sense, but also sensible. And we think that it really puts the focus on another aspect, which is really people in the city.
Technology has been seen as a way to put a curb on urban crisis, and yet we've seen people backfiring on tech and tech giants over the past few seasons. And it's not only about tech fatigue, but a real awareness that we are at the same time users and citizens. How can we build better cities altogether?
Well, technology is very interesting today, and the reason is that you could say that if in the year 2000 it was a lot about digitization, about going from the physical world to the digital world. Today is about hybridizing the two. It's about internet becoming Internet of Things and entering in the physical space and in the space of the city. So I would say that technology is what is enabling many new things to appear in terms of analysis of the city, in terms of projects and products in the city. We wouldn't have things such as Uber or Airbnb without this new space of Internet of Things. But at the same time, you're right. I think we don't want to focus on technology. We don't want technology fatigue. And the way to do it is really to think about the old idea by Mark Weiser, who was one of the pioneers in computing a few decades ago. He was at Xerox PARC, and he had this idea of ubiquitous computing. And his dream was that basically computing and technology disappears, and we can focus again on the very important thing, which is the interaction we have with space.
And even though technology becomes more seamless, still citizens are really backfiring again on tech giants. Take the example of Sidewalk Labs in Toronto, for instance, where citizens have been massively tackling Google for the use of data they're making there.
You're absolutely right. Actually, I've been following the project very closely, also because I'm sitting on Water for Toronto board for advising Water for Toronto on this, and we've also been, collaborating with Sidewalk in the past. So I've been seeing both sides of this, and I think every time we experiment with something new, we need to define the new rules for doing it, and I think that's what's happening. Here you have different many stakeholders. You've got a very large company that's been one of the pioneers and the leaders in the digital space, and we're talking about making a new city, a new piece of city in Toronto. So I think we really need to define how to do it, and I think that's what's going on. So I would say yes, there have been quite a lot of, I wouldn't say fights, but basically confrontation on both sides. But I think that's very interesting because it's what will lead us to learn how to deal with similar processes around the world.
And again, these questions mean better inclusion at core. Inequalities in urban areas have never been so high. And smart cities actually need people to live in them, right?
Absolutely, but again, it's it can go both ways. For instance, there's a project we are very excited about. It's a project we just launched with the new mayor of Stockholm, and basically what we're doing is actually using data that comes from all the devices we carry in our cities in order to understand segregation and integration in cities. So again, here's an example of how we can use the space of big data in order to better understand segregation and what is going on between different communities, and then hopefully start to fix it. For instance, by having new policies on public space and other type of civic policies.
So would you say in the end that local governments are about to turn into data management hubs? Should they have the end actually on the way we collect, curate, and exploit data in the city?
Well, I think that data is going to be behind a lot of the things we are doing today with our data. I think architecture is going to be redefined through data, the same planning, and certainly also city governments. Today, actually, I'm connected from Barcelona, and Barcelona did a very interesting experiment a few years ago, and that's when they actually put together the city architect position with the CTO position and the chief technology officer of the city. So combining them was really a way to recognize that planning needs data, and then you needed somebody who was able to bridge the two worlds, the world of data and the world of space.
And you've been part of so many projects worldwide, from Europe to the US and China. I bet there's no one-size-fits-all type of model, but there are some do and don'ts we should bear in mind.
I think you're totally right. A lot of the ways of doing things depend on the culture and depends on this place or another place, depends on local conditions. So there's not something you can easily generalize. I'll try to distill perhaps a very simple do and don't. I think I would say don't start top down. Try and don't start from technology. So because that's usually just a recipe for disaster, just starting from technology, imposing it on people, and then without creating feedback loops. Conversely, I would say the key important thing is really to start from citizens and start by listening to what they want and creating healthy feedback loops between design on one side and the response of the people. So somehow, if you wanted to summarize it using or paraphrasing Frank Lloyd Wright, we could say the three most important things to focus on would be people, and people.
And speaking of people, they actually been pretty vocal and loud if you think about the Yellow Vest movement, for instance, in Paris and France. What can we learn from this type of grassroots movement?
And I think somehow, this is making the same point, because my impression, I've been in Paris many times during the demonstrations, and I've read a lot in the papers about what the Yellow Vests have been asking for, and to me, is exactly what we were saying is about they're asking to be heard, to be listened to have a say. And so I think perhaps what we are seeing today is really the end of that old 20th century world of top-down decision-making, and starting with a more interactive, feedback loop-based way of making decisions.
Alrighty. Thank you so much for stopping by The Urban.
Thank you very much for having me.
And now, back to studio with Mecca Brunel, CEO of Gecina, and Jean Jouzel, climatologist, former vice chair of the scientific working group of the IPCC. Quick reaction with the both of you to Colorado's perspective. What does metropolitanization mean to you, and how should we define it? Mecca.
Well, this is a very good question, because we are facing the 68% of the global population of the world by 2050, maybe earlier, will live in the cities. And so the consequence of that is, what does that mean in terms of global trends? And the global trends we are facing are not interest rates moving up, but are about metropolitanization and people moving to the city center around the transportation hubs. And in very mixed-use areas, they would like to be close to their office, live close to their office, have their leisure very close to that, shop in the near areas, etc. So this is one of the megatrends. The second megatrend is technology, as Karorati was mentioning, and the fact that it has completely transformed our way of life, way of working, way of shopping, way of having fun, etc. And the third one, which is as important as the two others, if not the most important one, is about the climate change and the consequences of the climate change. And we see, after the yesterday vote in France, for instance, and all around Europe, how this point becomes crucial and the center of people thinking and preoccupation in the coming period.
And speaking of climate change, Jean Jouzel, of course, yes. You are probably one of the best experts when it comes to trying to define this phenomenon. You actually been awarded a Nobel Peace Prize back in 2007. What has happened over the past 12 years?
So what has happened in 2007, this was the time of the fourth report, and which was very important for the Copenhagen meeting, indeed, 2 years later, but it was a failure, and we were not successful in Copenhagen. It was not successful in Paris. The Paris Agreement was well built, but unfortunately, we are not on our way to fulfill the commitments. I mean, maybe to fulfill the commitments, but clearly there is a gap between the commitments of the various countries and the objective of the Paris Agreement, which are really to keep global warming well below 2 degrees C and, if possible, below 1.5 degrees C with respect to pre-industrial area. But my main comment on this aspect of climate change I will comment on is really as a scientist. So in IPCC we have really a lot of thinking about climate change on the cities. There are 6 priorities. It's really to expand observations, and we need to better know what is really, both in terms of climate, I mean, this urbanized land problem is really, but expand observation also on, for example, greenhouse gas emission. Locally, we have to better know it. The second, understand climate interactions, and one example which can be cited is that, for example, pollution is a problem, in particular when we have an heat wave, but it's also a problem because this can change precipitation, because we have more nuclei in the clouds, and this change precipitation, and there are a lot of interactions. The third thing, but you will know, I mean, it's really that we will have 3 billion more people in urban area in 2050. We have really to build cities which are really well prepared for these people, and this needs really to really a lot of studies. I mean, developing of cities in the developing country, we cannot simply transplant what has done and has been done, and sometimes not really very smartly in the north. So we have really to adapt the cities of the south to climate change issues. So there are disruptive technology also, obviously. I mean, a lot of people are expecting a lot for digital issues, but it's not so simple because on the other hand, as you know, I mean, using digital is also it's also part of a growing contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. Is up to now, it's not far to 10%. And development of digital in the cities should be also very careful with respect to this problem of this link between digital approaches in general and greenhouse gas emission. So it's also important to support transformation in these cities, and this can be the role, this is the role of, you will have to have a governance well adapted to this, which is both in the collectivities, but also at the state level. So climate change issue cannot be tackled alone. As you know, there are this objective of this SDG, Sustainable Development Objective. And this is important to develop our cities with in mind not only priorities due to climate change issue, but also biodiversity, pollution, the problem of health, the problem also of inequalities. One of, the yellow vest problem, which was evoked by Carlo Ratti, is clearly not only a problem of cities, but also we see of territories in France. But we have to be careful because the first risk of climate change is related to this risk to increase inequalities, and we have to be very careful with respect to people and with respect to social issues.
So we definitely need a more holistic approach, if I do follow you closely, Jean. But we have 3 megatrends with MECA, 6 priorities with you. Let's try to see if we can make metropolitan areas great again. Urban, suburban, and rural areas, are we more alike than we think in the end? MECA.
Very good questions. I don't believe that putting similarities between different, type of areas in which we live can make everything. We are not robots, so we shouldn't consider that everybody is alike. But definitely these are complementary to each other. And we should consider that these are real complementarities, which should lead us to the fact that we shouldn't oppose inhabitants of some areas against each other, but consider that they are part of the same family. Now, in the past, what we did, and probably what has been a sort of waste of a lot of resources we had, maybe we didn't know, Jean, but we, since we made some progress and we are much more aware of that, but we decided to use all the resources at its optimum and to waste it. And so we used to, for instance, you're talking about rural areas. When you go to a supermarket and you want to buy strawberries, most of the time they are coming from all over the world except next door. So it is ridiculous that the strawberries you are producing in Paris region, France, for instance, is exported in some other areas, and you are consuming something coming from Asia, from South Africa, from, South America, whatever. What I'm saying is that it's much more about considering the holistic integration of people and the way of life, and how we can make it a shorter circuit in terms of how to use our resources, how to expand it, and how to go back to the essence of what was our way of living at some point. And that's why we believe that this urban expansion we have been through, and probably this is part of the reasons of the Yellow Vest. We ask them to go 50 kilometers far from the city centers, and they had to drive back and forth, what I call the dream of desperate housewives. This is over. You need to be in the city center. You need to be closer. You need to have clean public transportation, and you need to have all you need at a very short distance in order to be capable to use, if you want to travel, you travel, but on a day-to-day living, you need to be closer to that. By the way, it'll reduce also the amount of stress you have. You know that the French people are much more using, medicines for their nervous breakdown because they are living those kind of stress. If they were using the city, it should be welcoming, integrating, inclusive. They wouldn't go through those kind of stress. And that's why with Gecina, we try to keep our office, of course, expertise, but at the same time, keep also multi-res area, because we consider that one of the main points about offices is people who work, and if they want to work well, they need to have a decent home close to their jobs.
And of course, I don't want anyone to be stressed in this studio. But Jean, Mecca was raising a really great point here. Is consuming local part of the solution? Is it also a question of being more inclusive in terms of society?
Yes, certainly. Using local can be really very promising, but it's not so easy. Even looking at Paris, you have practically no agriculture directly used. We have to change, to modify it's not only to the system of agriculture, and we have also to think really how to make this city attractive. And I think the societal aspect is very important. We have also to make these people happy to live in cities. And it's not so easy, but I think it would be easier if you have really I would say the territories and the city go together, which is not the case for cities as Paris, for example, and I don't know other cities, but it's all the system which has to be transformed if you want the city, sustainable. And the point is, it's not so easy in the current context to have a local food, even in Paris. Coming back to cities, we have also, mobility, but I will repeat what Mecca said, but mobility is very important. We have to help, we have to have, yes, as you told, it should be easy. It's not so easy to have, I hope it's not a dream to have your work near you, your place. It's not so easy, to combine. And I think we will have more and more people willing to live in cities, because which is the case. We think of 6 billion people living in cities in 2050s, but you are right, Mecca. We have to think how to really have the same employment job not far to the cities and easy to access. And this is not so easy for the moment.
And I'm happy our guests agree here in studio, but that brings us back to the question of scale. In various urban areas, climate change has gone worse, especially due to urban spreading. We can see this happening in France, of course, but also in the US, in various parts of the world. Are big cities the right scale to fix it?
Yes. We have in France these new cities. It was nice to have around Paris new towns. Yes, it was south in the 60s or even. It can be considered successful, but not completely successful. I know if you go to Cergy-Pontoise or to Évry around Paris, this is a way to do it. At least, there are generally a lot of jobs in these cities, and this makes it easier, at least part of the people, to access their job. This makes it easier, but as you see, a lot of people are still attracted to come downtown Paris, and the prices are really growing up rapidly. But I feel we have to think of new cities, probably, yes. But in a way, there are places, for Paris is not the case, but these 3 billion additional people in city will be in new cities largely. And but this will be mainly in the south, okay, and this will be new cities.
Still on this question of big cities, Mecca, interesting fact, residents in Berlin are coming after real estate companies, accusing them of the raise of rents. And it's not only happening in Europe. Is this a wake-up call for your industry?
Well, this is a real question. I'm not a specialist of the Berlin real estate. I am not sure that it is really comparable to what we are doing, because the origin of most of the German multi-res companies is the social housing. And the reason that this social housing has been privatized, it's because they went bankrupt. Most of them were owned by lenders, and they went bankrupt. And being bankrupt, maybe the rents went going up, but at the same time, they were not, maintained, they were not managed, they were not properly offering the new services, etc. But in our case, we are not aiming the same public. Our target is much more the middle-class people who are workers, who need mobility in terms of changing their jobs, but at the same time, the mobility in their personal life. We are in a world that you start working, you're alone, you finish your studies, you have been in student housing, then you get married, you create a family, you have kids, you get expanded, you need a bigger apartment, then after a while the family is split because you divorce. You're remarried, so you have, different type of, children coming from different places, and all together create new families together. And ultimately you get old and you need smaller apartments, smaller spaces, but you need to live. As humanity has always done that since the beginning. You need to live with your families, with your people around, etc. So let's go back to fundamentals. Let's give people this flexibility, not only for their jobs to move from one place to another one, but give them the capacity to do so. And for doing so, you need to, you probably have a better choice with leasing spaces, leasing apartments, rather than owning them. Then when you want a divorce, you need to sell it. Market is going up and down. Now today, market is very high, but tomorrow it can go down. I have seen that so many times in my life. And at the same time, I think that this gives you the capacity to be much more adaptable. Now, if you want to have a better market, a more liquid, a more fluid, and rents and or prices under control, you need to build more. And you need to build more on the multi-res side for middle-class people, not for rich people, not for social housing. These are different type of business. But in our business, we are just providing spaces to live for people who are working and who are employers.
So if I do follow you closely, mobility is in a way empowerment.
Mobility is empowerment. And today, for corporates, for companies, attracting talent becomes the key issue. And keeping them, by the way, not only attracting them, but keeping them on the long run. And so for that, you need to have the mobility. And at some point, Gecina has the capacity to also offer to the corporate who are signing a lease for us, if they want, for some of their employees, the capacity to lease an apartment.
Now, again, when it comes to mobility, when it comes to societal changes in cities and big cities and metropolitan areas, culture is also a real crucial part of the phenomenon of the metropolitanization. Can cities be more open culture-wise?
I think so. I think that but by the way, you were asking Jean-Jouzel about the question if you should much more focus on big cities rather than smaller. I think that big cities have the capacity to scale up. And if you scale up, you can have a better offer, larger offer in terms of products of all kinds of culture, all kind of capacity, etc., rather than smaller city. It's a question of scaling up and the capacity to have a larger offer. It's the case, by the way, with global cities like Paris, for instance. But I think culture is culture like sports, like all kind of arts, and it's part of sustainability, and it's part of quality of life, and it's part of the choice you make to stay in a larger city or not. If you are not commuting all the time, believe me, it's a high quality of life living in Paris or in some areas when I'm talking about Paris, globally speaking, it's a wider Paris within all the hubs of different transportation, public transportation. Not only Paris, of course, itself, which is a beautiful city, maybe the most beautiful city in the world.
Jean, can culture be actually a powerful tool when it comes to fighting climate change?
Obviously, I mean, if I live in Paris, it's also because, it's easy to access culture. So at some point, there are advantages to have large city, big cities, but one point I would like to insist on is that this large city is very fragile with respect to climate change. We have to think of adaptation. They have to be adapted. They have to be adapted with respect to climate risk. And generally speaking, in these large cities, there are two climate risks. One is floodings. I have this image of San Juan in Puerto Rico just after Irma, but we have a lot, these cities which are by the sea in coastal areas, some are it would be very difficult for them to protect against sea level rise. So this is the first point. On one can cite New York, Mumbai, obviously Tokyo, Shanghai, Lagos, and obviously Dhaka. And so a lot of cities, large cities, and they have to be. And the second thing is really this heat waves. One key point of the last IPCC report is that records of temperature really increase twice faster than average temperature. And so if you have a temperature warming of 2 degrees, you will have 4 degrees C, higher temperature records. And this is very important because we are not prepared to heat waves, and this is really a risk for these cities with these urban heat aspects also, which increase the problem. So these cities, on one side, we understand the advantage to have large cities for culture, for all sport, as you say, and I agree, it's easier to, and people are attractive also for education, obviously. But on the other hand, more they are fragile with respect, vulnerable with respect to climate change. And this, we have to really to think of this. So adaptation is crucial. To develop cities with keeping in mind that vulnerability with respect to climate change is very important.
And pardon my French, but size do matter.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. I think it matters, but also we need to integrate, as Jean said, the fragility regarding all this vulnerability against all kind of, important climate change consequences. We saw, by the way, 2 years on a row, the flooding in Paris, by the way, and it was impressive and couldn't happen at any time. We used to say that the last flood was in 1910, and it happens 2 times, 2 years on a row. So I think that we should consider that this is going to be part of our regular life and not from time to time, and integrate that in the way we are building, working, living. Ultimately, we are serving people. If there are not people in our apartments or in our offices or in our student housing, it doesn't work. So ultimately, we do all these things to serve people and, of course, to serve our company and everybody within the company.
So finally, climate and social change have been driving the conversation over the past few months. Do you think that local governments and real estate professionals have actually heard the message, again, driven by citizens?
Well, these are good questions. I don't know. This is a wide one, though. I don't know what does that mean that government at large or real estate people at large have heard the message. My sense is that this message is not only about climate change here and there, messages here and there, yellow vest or not yellow vest, or all kind of, and all the immigration, for instance, we are seeing coming from Africa, most of them leaded by the fact that there is a climate change in Africa in some areas, or they cannot continue to do agriculture and to continue to be fed properly. I was about to say, I think that everybody now is conscious that we should be aware of that. Otherwise, it won't work. Has everybody listened carefully and understood? I don't know, but we cannot say anymore, I didn't know, and it happened just by chance, and I didn't pay attention. This is part of our lives. And the responsibility we have towards the next generation is stop wasting, stop what we have done so far. Not sure that we can heal the hurt we brought to the planet, but definitely maybe we can continue to hurt it.
And eventually, final word with you, Jean. Again, more inclusive, fluid, and greener cities might not happen overnight, but cities can be built in a day, right? So how can we foster more of these?
Indeed, we are just after European election. I am very happy that this issue at least have been part of the election this day, so it was taken into account, and we will have in France elections of local authorities next year, and my bet and my hope is that this issue about the ecological transition will be really key in the discussion of the local authorities. This is my hope, and this will be the case probably in Paris and in other big cities. National authorities, their role is not really to take day-to-day decision with respect to cities. This should be done by local authorities, local government, region. In France, it depends from one country to another, but it's really in local area, in cities, that decision about mobility, urban development are taken. So this is my wish, that these local authorities take really more and more seriously, and they are doing so, this problem of climate and city development.
And that's all we have time for today. Mika Brunel, Jean Jouzel, thank you for your perspective and takes on the metropolitan areas and megacities.
Thank you, Marjorie.
Thank you.
And you can catch up the other episodes and take a listen to the French version of The Urban with Marie Misset on the best podcast platforms. Stay connected and see you next on The Urban.